Hey, what's up, everybody? If you appreciate the format and you appreciate what we're doing here, then make sure you contribute. Hey, if you're enjoying the content here at Dennis Sperling Unfiltered, make sure you support it by sharing, and subscribing to the channel. And also, hit that little notification bell in the corner so that you'll get notice of each and every one of our live feeds. Hey, what's up, everybody? If you appreciate the format and you appreciate what we're doing here, then make sure you contribute to the Cash App, make sure you contribute to the PayPal, make sure you donate to the Super Chat. It's only you and your contributions that keep this thing going. Thanks. What's up, you guys? This is Dennis Sperling, and I am back at it again. And I want to talk to you guys about another black man from history. Now, we've skipped through the 1600s, 1700s, and now we're up to the 1800s, and we're talking about black men in America. Well, this particular black man in America. Here's the thing. You know, people want to make it seem like brothers just rolled over and accepted slavery. They want to act as though we didn't fight every step of the way. There was over 163 slave rebellions as a result of our brothers putting in that work and fighting against slavery, fighting against the oppression. We knew we were supposed to be free. But the bottom line is they had the guns, they had the ammo, and it took a while for us to get to the point where we could be the people that we're supposed to be. So, you know, I want to talk to you guys about Mr. Robert Smalls. Okay, a little bit about Robert Smalls, and I have a video presentation that I found for you guys. Robert Smalls was born April 5th, 1839. He died February 23rd, 1915. He was an American politician, publisher, businessman, naval pilot, born into slavery in Beaufort, South Carolina. He freed himself, his crew, and his families during the American Civil War by commandeering a federal transport ship, the CSS Planter, in Charleston Harbor on May 13, 1862. All right, and sailing it from Confederate-controlled waters of the harbor to the U.S. blockade that surrounded it. So before we go any further, I want to make sure you guys understand, look, I want you guys to join the page. All right, straight up, you got to join the page, family. You gotta become a member. You got to join the page. You got to let me know that you're in here, that you're in the house. It's really not that hard to do. All you got to do is join the page, man. And you know, shout out to my man John Smith. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate that. You know, I do this, man, because I need you brothers to always be how should I say it? You need to see examples of masculinity, of black masculinity. With all of us being attacked, they want to rewrite history and make it seem like we was just all a bunch of suckers and, you know, that we didn't do anything to try to free ourselves. They want to say black men are this, black men are emasculated. But the truth is we've been fighting this thing since day one, since the first one of us was captured on the slave ships and brought from West Africa. We've been fighting. And so it's important for brothers to see that. It's important not only now, but to see what we did in the past. So, you know, if you appreciate what I'm doing, if you like what I'm doing here, man, make sure you contribute to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal. More importantly, I want you guys to make sure that, you know, make sure that you join. And I'm putting this up right now. Make sure you join the channel. It's a real easy thing to do. All you got to do is just go down here to where it says join, click on this button right here, join in. We got Young and Hustling, Balling, Rich Rolling, baby. But either way, without further ado, we're gonna get over here and we're gonna talk a little bit about Robert Smalls. Y'all kick back, y'all enjoy it. In the meantime, let me see. Shout out to all my members. W. Alfonso, Malika, R. Alexis. Let me see who else we got. John Smith, of course. And so, let's kick back and vibe. I'll open up the channel a little bit later on. It's important for us to know about our real superheroes. And we'll put in context what this man did. This man was an enslaved man. There's a war going on. He commandeered a boat. Let's hear a little bit about the brother. Let me know if you can hear it. Let me know if you guys can hear it when it comes. If you can hear it when it comes in, make sure you hit the #1 button. I want to make sure you can hear what's being said. So make sure you let me know you can hear it by hitting the #1 button. All right, when it comes in.
Robert Smalls, he was born April 5th, 1839, and he died February 23rd, 1915, at 75 years old. He was born in Beaufort, South Carolina, and his mother's name was Lydia Polite. It's suspected that his father was Henry McKee. At the time of Robert Smalls' birth, our president was Martin Van Buren, and our vice president was Richard M. Johnson. Some notables during that year: Robert Cornelius takes the first self-portrait in the U.S., the first modern-day selfie. In the state of Mississippi, women were allowed to own property for the first time. In 1839, we were also in the midst of our second Seminole War. I believe it was in our 4th year. And there was a very popular mutiny.
Now, the property that women were allowed to own, slaves, black slaves. That's the property women were allowed to own in Mississippi.
Or the Amistad, a Spanish slave ship, where the slaves took over and begged for their freedom in court. Specifically in South Carolina in 1839, this is known as the antebellum period, and it's really a description of the time period leading up to the Civil War of 1861. During the antebellum period, this was a great time for slaves who were in servitude to be exploited to hard labor because of the world demand of the agricultural crops in the South, such as cotton and sugar. Other notable roles that slaves played were house servants, nurses, midwives, carpenters, blacksmiths, drivers, preachers. They had a very diverse role within the fabric of society within the Deep South, other than being just slaves. During the antebellum period, there was about 8 million people that lived in the South. About 383,000 people owned about 4 million slaves. So about 25% of the Southern families owned slaves. There were about 2,000 slave owners.
It's important to understand not every Southern family owned slaves. So when white folks say, my people, no, you were too broke. If you can't ride around in a Bentley right now, you didn't own slaves. Okay, you're just poor white folk, you didn't own slaves. That's another thing we got. Not all of them own slaves. Let's keep listening.
That had more than 100 slaves. There was only about 14 that owned more than about 500 slaves. Typically, most slave owners had 4 or less slaves in their servitude. Jumping back to Robert Smalls, again, was the son of Henry McKee, who was the son of the plantation owner John McKee. And at the time, Lydia Polite was a house slave, and it was not uncommon for slaves to be sexually exploited. And there were a lot of kids who were born from this particular.
Basically, what he's saying is that his mother was a African woman, enslaved African woman, and his father was more than likely the plantation owner, a white man. So they had some sort of arrangement going on, and plenty of kids was running around there mixed and whatnot.
Particular situation, Robert Smalls being one of them. So his ethnicity, I think, really played a strong role for him as far as building his self-esteem, or the false sense of having self-esteem of who he was at the time. He was allowed to stay in the home, unlike other slaves. He also
basically what they're saying is, you can't tell me I'm your son and you around here running stuff and I'm supposed to be subservient. He had a belief in himself that he was better than his circumstances because his dad was a slave owner. He just wasn't going for
was treated as the son, the favorite son of the house. So Robert Smalls initially got a false sense of self-esteem built up based on his status within the slave home. His mother generally was, for the most part of her life, was a field slave who at the time happened to be a house slave when Robert was born. So Robert was able to grow up in a very peculiar situation. He was allowed to be out past curfew. He played and intermingled with the white kids in the neighborhood, and he was in a situation.
So the thing, what you got to understand is Robert Smalls was treated special. He was treated different. This is why they were very careful with the slave code. They were very careful. They didn't want these black children, even if they were mixed mulatto, to start thinking they were equal to white children, because then they might start doing the same things that the white people would do. Hey, you can't treat me like that. They might develop a little self-pride depending on how they were treated. And so this is Robert Smalls is a product of the people, basically cutting him some slack and treating him with dignity and respect.
Situation where he was able to, if you will, blend in or be accepted or tolerated within the family and within
Look at all them little biracial
that
children
surrounded them.
Look at all these little biracial children around here. Just look at this, man.
As he was growing up to being, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, Lydia became very, very concerned for her son because she believed he was oblivious to the reality of being a slave in the Deep South. She took him to an auction and she made him work in the fields and do chores. She also made him attend a public beating,
now his mother had a problem with him thinking he was too uppity. His black mother, who was a field slave most of her life and ended up working in the house, said, I got to break this boy down a peg because he thinks he's better than the rest of these Negroes around here. And he's not. So she made him pick cotton in the fields. She took him to a public beating. And basically, she's trying to orient him into how black folks are supposed to be treated. Now, this is the same thing that modern African-American women do. They talk bad about their sons oftentimes. Boy, you ain't nothing but a ninja. You ain't gonna be nothing. Your daddy wasn't nothing. It's a way in which to keep you back in your place. In their mind, they're trying to save you from this system. But this is exactly what this woman was doing, trying to save him from the system. But in actuality, that's what was necessary, because if he didn't think of himself as he did and have high self-esteem, he wouldn't have even tried to escape. So imagine, right, if all those black women, all those black boys were raised with high self-esteem, slavery wouldn't last as long. So it's a self-perpetuating condition. You keep treating them like a slave, you make the mothers treat them like a slave, you tell them, you reinforce that culture in them, and they'll stay enslaved. The minute you start empowering your boys and start treating them as though they are somebody, that they're special, then that's when you get a whole bunch of black Supermans.
This experience fundamentally changed Robert, obviously, for any 10-year-old to experience. I'm sure it shattered a lot of what he thought his world was all about. She wanted him to really understand the Jim Crow, bondage and suffering and misery and pain of destruction of people, to get him into the reality of being someone who needs to be thinking about, playing on the radar, I'm sure. So this effect really had a negative effect on Robert. He began to get in trouble with the local authorities. He began to get arrested. And
so he was fine up until she started trying to break him down. That's when he started rebelling against the system. Okay. Think about that. As long as he had high self-esteem, he felt good about himself, he wasn't rebelling against it. The minute she tried to put him in his place, that's when he started bucking back. Make sure you contribute to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal. If you have something to say, you can send me a PayPal payment, and then I'll read what you have to say on the air. In the meantime, we'll continue.
Believe he had a hard time grappling with the reality, the culture shock of the whole slave and servitude and bondage of people. So
remember, this is South Carolina. 44% of the slave owners in South Carolina at this time were women. They were black women. Remember that. I mean, I'm sorry, 44% of the slave owners, okay, were blacks, and of that, about 64% of them were women. Remember that now. Remember where we are in South Carolina.
Around 12 years old, Robert, his mom, Lydia, was really concerned, and she asked the slave owners to make Robert Smalls leave the area. Basically, rent him out to be a slave somewhere else other than where he was. She thought that would be the best way to help Robert.
His mama steady trying to break him down. Go rent him out and let him be. He needs to get treated like a slave master. He ought to love. This is what she's doing to her own son, right? This is what his mom
survived. And he's at 12 years old at the time. And you have to understand, at 12 years old, a slave was very capable of hard labor and going out and working 8, 10, 12 hour, 14-hour days. And that was expected at that age, because at the time, slaves were only living, male slaves were only living to about 35, 45 years old, roughly, because they were just simply worked to death.
They worked the brothers so to death. They only lived to be 35, 45 years old. That's how hard these brothers worked back. This is how hard they worked those black men back in the 35 or 45 years. You dead. You worked so hard your whole life.
And the women probably had about good 40 to 45 years old of their life expectancy. And during that time, you know, they were required to have babies upon babies upon babies to create more and more workforce. So as Robert was shipped off into Charleston, which is about an hour and a half away from Beaufort, he was 12 years old at the time. And as he was sent out, you have to understand that as a slave, it was very unusual for them to be able to be allowed to leave the property, let alone be able to leave the property and live on their own. But at the same time, if he made $10, he had to give $8 to $9 back to the slave owners, and he had to survive on what was left. So it was a very false sense of renting out the slave. He was definitely still within bondage, but he had some certain amounts of freedoms where he didn't have to be on the plantation. And that was really the best part of that. As he was in Charleston, he again was a laborer, a rigger, sailmaker, lamplighter, and then he just really acquired a lot of different skills along this way as he was growing into who he was, eventually becoming a pilot of a Confederate supply ship called the Planter. When I say pilot, he was specifically called a wheelman because back then at the time, they were not allowed to call African-American slaves pilots or captains or anything of leadership within that realm or role within the Charleston Harbor status of being a pilot. Eventually, he met his wife. Her name was Hannah. She was a slave, a hotel maid at a hotel, but she was a slave of another owner. And they met and married in 1856. At the time they got married, I believe she had 2 children. It's been conflicting stories about how old she was. I saw somewhere that she was 27. I also read somewhere that she was 35. Robert Smalls was believed to be 17 at the time. So he went from 12 years old, doing his thing, acquiring all these different skills, and then age 17.
So this man, basically, he was learning a lot of different skills. They had him as a wheelman, which is basically a pilot on the ships, a captain. They couldn't call him a captain, but the bottom line, he ended up getting married. He met a woman. We're going to skip ahead a little bit just so we can slide forward, move it along. And but the bottom line is he got married. He had a wife. You know, he's still doing his thing. He's been leased out, and he's giving part of his money back to his slave owner, i.e. his dad, because he's been leased out to another service provider.
That, you know, if they were still able to work and provide the wages that they had, they were just fine with that. And it was really more of a business transaction from what I can tell. So it was very scary, very unstable. It was something that you didn't really feel comfortable with being in this situation because you knew the volatility of it all. So naturally, he wanted to get his freedom. And at the time, slaves, if they were able to save enough money, they were able to buy their freedom. And again, I believe this is another symbolic.
That's the brother right there.
What could have happened.
This is what Robert Smalls looked like. As you guys can see, he was a mulatto man. right? This is when he was in Congress, by the way. So let's continue to watch him.
For them, but he was in the impression that he could pay for his freedom. So he went to the owners and talked to them about their buying their freedom, and they wanted about $800 at the time for him and his family to be classified as free, so that then they can go migrate to the north. And $800 back then was about the equivalent of about $20,000 in today's world, and he only had about $100, which was already an impressive amount of money in itself because it was his life savings. And for all the money that he had to make in his whole entire life for income as a slave, was going back to Beaufort, 80–90% of that. So he was still able to really show his ingenuity, if you will, with that leftover money. I read that he bought cigarettes, candy, and different things to be able to sell then on the docks of Charleston Harbor, and then make that money. And then obviously.
So basically he worked, and with the money he made, he would go sell candy and stuff like that on the harbor to people coming in. So he was a hustler. He was trying to get his money. He was trying to raise enough money to free his family. Okay.
Make enough to save. So within this dynamic, he really saw that option, being able to buy your family's freedom and go that route, really wasn't the reality. It wasn't really a viable route because of the instability and the time that it would have took to save that much more money.
Basically, what they said was, even if you bought your family your freedom, they could always recapture you, right, and put you back in slavery. They had all kind of crazy laws and stuff like that. You didn't have your paperwork, they'll take you and send you somewhere else, like Mississippi or Florida or something like that. So it wasn't a stable thing. So first you got to come up with basically $20,000, which was $800, and then still it was a chance involved. Make sure y'all get the likes up. Hit the like button, folks.
Things probably would have changed dramatically for him and his family anyway. So like Smalls, and many people who are oppressed, they tend to become very smart, specifically at survival and ingenuity and courage. So they pick their battles and bide their time, and they will find a way eventually to overcome. And so that's exactly what he did. So what Robert Smalls was able to do was basically get his family stabilized, work on his skills, and plot and scheme his way out of this situation. Well, after about 5 years of marriage, the Civil War begins.
Check it out.
In 1861, the American Civil War, and it starts at the Battle of Fort Sumter near Charleston Harbor. By this time, Robert Smalls was a seasoned pilot on the Planter. Sometime around April of 1862, Smalls began to plan his escape, according to some of the reports that I read. About 3 a.m. On May 13th, Smalls and several members of his crew put in motion their daring escape. Generally, he had 8 members of the crew, but one of the members of the crew he did not trust, so he didn't.
So one of the people, he ain't trust him, so he never told him about it. But he started planning his escape to the north with his whole family and the families of some of his crew.
Not let him in on the escape plan. Smalls put on then the Captain Ripley's straw hat and uniform and took his 7 crew member pilot upon the Planter and guided it through checkpoints, which required sophisticated hand signals and codes throughout this hour-and-a-half long journey through these wharfs and battle forts. During some point in that time, Smalls was able to pick up his family and the family of his.
You got to understand something. The risk that this man was taking, he was free. He was pretty much able to do whatever he wanted to do. But for him, that still wasn't freedom. So this black man, having been born into slavery, decided that he was going to take the chance for freedom. And not only did he go along, but also his crew went along. And then not only did they free themselves, but they went during that time period, during that trip, managed to get all of their family members and got them free. All of this done in the early morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning, they managed all this. This is how bold these people were. This is how bold our ancestors were in their quest for freedom. Nobody was laying down, waiting around for white folks to come free them. This is the story that this story of heroism. It wasn't just, oh, we waiting for the northern uh, army to come down and free us. These people were freeing themselves every which way they could.
Crew, and they were able to get them aboard, and then they were able to guide themselves out of the Confederate gun range right into the Union Navy's gun range. Luckily, Lydia Polite had brought.
Now, he could have very well left his woman. He could have left her children. Remember that. He'd been married for 5 years. She had her own kid. And so when our sisters say stuff like, oh, y'all don't protect black women, you never did, that's a damn lie. Here's an example of it right here. Do you know the story of Robert Smalls? He was already on the ship. All those men were already on the ship. They could have just sailed north and said hell with it, but they went back and they waited for they made a plan so that they could also feed their families. Black men have always supported black women and children. We've always protected them when we could. But in this particular, this is the type of heroism that needs to be discussed.
Along a sheet or a dress, a white one, so they quickly brought down the Confederate flag and put the white flag up, and they were able to be in the hands of the Union Navy with the Planter ship. So when you think about the Planter ship, the supply ship at the time, it had its own light guns, it had artillery pieces aboard, it had about 200 pounds of ammunition, and obviously crucial intelligence information from Robert Smalls as far as the Confederate code book that really.
So not only did he free himself, but he ended up helping the Confederate Army. I mean, the Union Army, and they actually gave him control of that ship. They made him basically the captain of that ship.
Gave the Union forces really a great strategic advantage. Along with that, Smalls brought with him his knowledge of Charleston Harbor and his invaluable piloting skills. He was able to really give the Union Army, right in the beginning, right there at Fort Sumter, a great boost of accomplishment. And this obviously really transcended him into the superstar in the world figure at the time and today. And
this black man,
flag officer by the name of DuPont,
was considered a superstar and a world figure. The whole world was looking at the United States. And then you had this black man, Robert Smalls, emerge and do these amazing things that he had done. But see, we don't talk about this. We talk about Martin Luther King. We talk about Medgar Evers. We always talk about the black men that get shot. We never talk about the black heroes like this. Who writes a book about the losers in the war? And, you know, we don't want to disrespect Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, but which story is more inspiring? The story of Dr. Martin Luther King, who took one to the neck, the story of Brother Malcolm X, who got shot in front of his family, the story of Medgar Evers. Who do you think is more inspirational to young black boys? Those stories, or a story like Robert Smalls, a story like Abu Bukhari II, a story like Mansa Musa? These are the stories of black men that they bury and they don't want us to hear about. It is your job as black men to dig these stories up, just like I'm doing, and retell them and tell them over and over and over again to your black sons, so they can have examples of black men being heroes, black men being venerated for their skill, for their craft, for their courage, for their bravery. These are the type of stories we need to talk about. So let's continue with Robert Smalls, and I hope this is inspiring you. Hit the #1 button if you appreciate what I'm doing, and hit the thumbs up button as you come in.
To his Navy secretary about Robert Smalls, and I quote, "Robert, the intelligent slave and pilot of the boat who performed this bold feat so skillfully, informed me, the captive of the Fort Sumter gun, presuming it would be a matter of interest to us, he is superior to any who have come into our lines, and he's intelligent as many of them have been."
He is superior to any who have come into our lines, and he is intelligent as any of them. This is what they were saying. This is what the Union Army was saying about this black man, Robert Smalls. Why is it that we don't hear about this man? Why is it that we hear more about the brothers that fail than we hear about these type of brothers right here? Why is that? Ask yourself that question. You guys tell me, why is it that we don't hear about Robert Smalls and his heroism?
And he's at age 23 with this
he was 23.
huge accomplishment.
He was 23 years old. He was 23 years old, and he was already known around the world for this act of heroism. You can't tell me, you young brothers that are out there who are under the age of 30, you're ready right now to be the hero that you're supposed to be. You're ready right now to go out and figure what it is that's going, what God has planned for you, whatever your purpose is. You're ready right now. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait and build stuff. Look what Robert Smalls did with ingenuity and courage. The world is yours, fellas. Let's continue to listen. Shout out to Timothy Blue.
He was a slave and he was a person of color. They did not give him any official awards through the U.S. government, but he did receive $1,500, which is about $40K, about $40,000 in today's standards. And then there was a $4,000 bounty put on his head in the Deep South. So he was known as that war criminal. And you have to imagine the psychological blow and shock to the Confederate military. You had this slave who they considered someone who wasn't intelligent enough to be able to
look at that perm, baby. Look at that part in his hair right there, right? Now, of course, this struck a blow to the Confederate Army. Can you imagine they're sitting down there with 4 million black people? They sitting down there with 2 million black men. Can you imagine if how did this happen? How did this black man get so smart? I mean, how does he know how to sell? They're supposed to be out there dumb and stupid in the fields picking. What happens if all of them are this smart? It shook them. It scared the bejesus out of them. Because, see, they'd already been dealing with black folks. Remember, the black men were the ones doing all the carpentry and building and whatnot. But they figured we had them so oppressed, they didn't know anything. Now they have to sleep with one eye open because they don't know what's going to happen next. Because, man, if he slipped by, there must be others like him that could do the same thing. You see? So it unnerved the Confederate Army. It unnerved the Confederate Navy. This is what he did. This is what Robert Smalls did.
Do all these different things, but they were in a situation where they had the slaves talking about it. The newspapers were talking about it. This was something that they just could not, keep within the realms of their own.
Everybody was talking about what Robert Smalls did. The black folks knew, the slaves knew. They because see, now other people get an idea well, he did it, we can do it. You see, so this is why he's important, and this is why he's venerated even now, 200 years later in history.
Military, and so it was really a world event that everyone knew about, and he was really, really, really famous from this.
A world event.
And I think the 3 members of the crew were court-martialed, and I think 2 of them were acquitted because the basis of their acquittal was that there was just no way that a slave could have done this on his own, and he had to have help from someone from the Confederate militaries.
So they had to put somebody up and say, no, we can't let it out that this black man did this all by himself. So we're going to put some white men in jail just so we can have a story and say they helped. Because if the word got around that these black men did this all by themselves, it would kill the morale of the whole Confederate Army. This was everywhere. This is world news. All right. And it made them look horrible. Here they were saying that we were inferior and all that. You got somebody steal your boat right under your nose and take his whole family and 7 of the crew members, their whole families with them to the north and one of your boats. They had to make a reason why it happened. Get the likes up.
So I thought that was really, really interesting. But it goes to show that how, when you are, again, oppressed person and you're in that situation, how the ingenuity that you have to have, the perseverance, the courage, and all these different things that go along with being a slave and surviving as a slave really made him a very special person. Now, Robert Smalls didn't really stop there. He really went on to do some more things. So in August of 1862, him and Reverend Mansfield French went to D.C. in hopes to persuade President Lincoln and the Secretary of War at the time, Edward Stanton, to permit black men to fight in the Union Army. Now, remember, before Smalls...
Now, and up until that point, they hadn't integrated the army. They basically got northern white boys coming down there fighting in the South on behalf of these black folks, but they wouldn't let the African enslaved black men fight. They were actually losing a war until they allowed black men to begin to come in and fight. Because imagine you down there fighting these white boys who used to running through this forest and these woods. They used to running like that. And so you got these northern boys from New York. They don't know anything about territory in South Carolina and swamps and Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana. So they getting their butt handed to them. It wasn't until they allowed the black men to come in and fight that they start winning the war. But what Robert Smalls ended up doing, he basically became an advocate for the brothers and said, let us back in. But let's continue listening, and then we're going to read a little bit more, open up the chat room.
Smalls's exploits and all this popularity that he had, and his ability to show others, especially in the North, of his intelligence. President Lincoln was against the mobilization of black troops in the Union Army. He didn't want that at all. It wasn't something he was wanting to do. But subsequently, based off what Robert Smalls had done, and for what I understand, President Lincoln leaned over to Robert Smalls and asked him, what would make you do something as wild as this exploit as far as delivering the Planter supply ship?
Freedom.
And he said, in one word, I quote, freedom. Subsequently, the Secretary of War, Edward Stanton, ordered about 5,000 African Americans to enlist in the Union forces at Port Royal, and they were classified as the 1st and 2nd South Carolina regiments, the colored regiments. Smalls went on to work as a civilian with the Navy until March of 1863. Smalls was present at least 17 major battles and engagements in the Civil War, contributing to the success of the Union Army. I think he and his efforts really was a key factor in the success of the Civil War in itself. During his time that he served, he was a pilot of the Crusader, the Planter again, the USS Keokuk, also the US Isaac Smith. One highlight that I thought was really nice was that in 1863, Smalls was piloting the Planter and it came under attack. The captain at the time, his name was James Nickerson, fled the ship, and Smalls.
The captain fled the ship, right? The white captain fled the ship, and Robert Smalls took over because so he went after he got free. He didn't just stay there; he went back into the war to help the Union Army.
Smalls refused to surrender because he knew if he surrendered, it'd be certain death and torture, and he would be made an example of, because remember, there's a $4,000 bounty on his head. So Smalls took over command of the ship. He piloted to safety, and then subsequently was promoted once again unofficially of the Planter as acting captain. So his naval status, wasn't ever really an official one because they had him serving as a civilian, but he definitely contributed in major ways that, again, I believe without his effort, his knowledge there, specifically in the Charleston harbor, we would not be as successful in the outcome of our war. So as you go on to think about Robert Smalls, he was at a great point in time in life where he could have just kind of really took his reward money and his family. He had his freedom, and they could have just really did their thing. And
that's him right there.
He could have just faded off in history, but he wasn't done. He ended up being a really business savvy person and being a real estate hawk. He made some very notable purchases within his community. He bought the Beaumont building, which he turned into a public school, and I'll talk about that later. He bought his former slave owner's home.
He bought his former slave owner's home in South Carolina. That's pretty bold.
He even went to court and was allowed to keep it after someone protested that within the family, or the previous family was there. And it's just a testament to like who he was and who he is, to be able to kind of just go and do that. He also got involved with some other businesses. He was the owner of the Beaufort Southern in 1872, African-American newspaper. And he got into the railroad enterprise business and was a part of that. So he was really focused on economic development in anticipation of Reconstruction. And if you think about what Reconstruction is all about, it was these 4 federal statutes passed by the 40th United States Congress.
All right, so we got enough of that. Look, let's read a little bit more about Robert Smalls. The link is in the chat room. If you guys like to come in and talk about this, let's talk about it. So Robert Smalls, this is him. He actually became a member of the United States House of Representatives from South Carolina, 7th District. He served from 1884 to 1887. Yeah, he was in the House. He was in Congress. Okay, he was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from South Carolina, 5th District from 1882 to 1883. Okay, um, and what else? This man, you know, he was a businessman. Of course, he was a Republican because remember the Republicans were the party of freedom at that time. But this is an amazing man, you know, and this is not somebody that we hear about a lot. It talks here, but you can go to Wikipedia. It talks about his service. He ended up doing what? So many different things. He helped found Wilberforce College, Wilberforce University in Ohio. Um, and let's see what else he did. And that, of course, that's a black college. What else? After the Civil War, right? Immediately following the Civil War, Smalls returned to his native Beaufort, where he purchased his former master's house at 511 Prince Street, which Union tax authorities had seized in 1863 for refusal to pay taxes. Later, the former owner sued to regain the property, but Smalls retained ownership in a court case. The case became an important precedent in other similar cases. His mother, Lydia, lived with him for the remainder of her life. That's the same mother that was trying to put him in his place. So she ended up benefit. He had imagined that now they live in here. Her son is the owner of the house that used to be owned by the slave master that had her enslaved. He allowed his former master's wife, the elderly Jane Bond McKee, to move into her former home prior to her death. He's clearly a very gracious man. This man was a gracious winner, right? Small spent 9 months learning to read and write. He purchased a 2-story Beaumont building to use as a school for African American children. What was his, let's see here. In 1866, Smalls went to business at Beaufort with Richard Howard Leeds, a man from Philadelphia. They opened a store to serve the needs of freedmen, black folks, right? Smalls also hired a teacher to help him study. That April, the radical Republicans who controlled Congress overrode President Andrew Johnson's vetoes and passed the Civil Rights Act of Civil Rights Act. In 1868, they passed the 14th Amendment, which was ratified by the United States to extend full citizenship to all Americans, regardless of race. Smalls invested significantly in economic development of the Charleston Beaufort region. In 1870, in anticipation of Reconstruction-based prosperity, Smalls, with fellow Representative Joseph Rainey, Alonzo Ranzier, and others, formed the Enterprise Railroad, an 18-mile horse-drawn railroad line that carried cargo and passengers between the Charleston wharves and the inland depots. Except for white director, carpetbagger, newspaper editor, legislator, and county treasurer Timothy Hurley, the railroad's board of directors was entirely African American. Richard H. Kane was the first president. Arthur Bernard E. Powers described it as the most impressive commercial venture by members of Charleston's black elite. Smalls owned and helped publish a black-owned newspaper, the Beaufort Southern Standard, starting in 1872. I mean, see, these brothers was doing all kinds of stuff, man. This is right out of slavery. You see what I mean? Like, this is not something that's written about. This is something that they should talk about, but they don't talk about it because they don't want you to feel as though that we were successful. Well, let's hear some of his honors. Fort Robert Smalls was named in his honor. It was built by free blacks in 1863 on McGuire Hill on the south side of Pittsburgh. During the American Civil War, it survived until the 1940s. The Robert Smalls House in Beaufort, South Carolina, has been designated a National Historic Landmark. A monument and statue are dedicated to his memory, where he is interred at Tabernacle Baptist Church in Beaufort. The Robert Smalls School is in Chiraw, South Carolina, is named for him. The Robert Smalls International Academy, formerly the Robert Smalls Middle School in Beaufort County, South Carolina, is named for him. During World War II, Camp Robert Smalls was established as a sub-facility of the Great Lakes Naval Training Center to train black sailors. The Navy was segregated in those years. In the Verter House Museum in Beaufort has an exhibit of Robert Smalls. In 2004, the U.S. named a ship Robert Smalls, USAV Major General Robert Small, LSV, a Corrado-class logistics support vehicle operated by the U.S. Army. It is the first Army ship named after an African American. Charleston held commemorative ceremonies in 2012 on the 150th anniversary of Robert Small's escape on the Planter, with special programs on May 12th and 13th. Robert Small's Parkway is a section of South Carolina Highway 170 that crosses Port Royal Island and leads into Beaufort. A statue of Robert Small is in the U.S. National Museum of African American History and Culture. There is a proposal to create a statue of Robert Smalls to be installed in the South Carolina State House. So, you know, this man is well known. We just don't know about him. And it's unfortunate. But anybody who wants to join in and come have this conversation, here's the thing. You can just come on in. If you appreciate this, man, make sure you hit the thumbs up. Join this channel. I think it's important for us as Black men to talk about Black masculinity. It's important for us to talk about the accomplishments of the Black men that came before us, irrespective of the dire consequences that they were facing. They handled life. They grabbed it by the horns. They moved forward with courage and determination, intelligence and conviction, knowing that that they were on the side of right. We have to take our hats off to the late, great Robert Smalls for what he did. This is something every Black boy in America should know about Robert Smalls and what he did. This man died in 1950. Many of you all's grandparents were alive at the time he passed away. So he's only one generation away from you. You know somebody who was alive at the time that Robert Smalls was alive. But unfortunately, his legacy and his accomplishments have been lost in history. These are the type of people we need to talk about. Robert Smalls is somebody that we as Black men need to remember always for his courage and not only his courage under fire, but also his courage afterwards and his foresight to see that, hey, you know what, I can capitalize on this Reconstruction period. He is one of ours. This is somebody who went through the same thing that many of our ancestors went through here as American descendants of Africans, the African enslaved people. This is someone that we should all make sure that we remember and that we mention when we talk about our greats, when we talk about the ones who have been assassinated. Let's also talk about Robert Smalls. If you appreciate what I'm doing here, y'all make sure y'all contribute to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal. I want to thank everybody who's joined. Thank you for the contributions. And if no one wants to talk tonight, that's fine. That's okay. Let me see. My man Arlexa says we don't talk about him because his story would serve as an inspiration for our boys. That's exactly right. And that's exactly why we need to talk about him, R. Lewis. We cannot allow dominant society. We cannot allow those who write the history books to figure out which one of our heroes we will celebrate. We will pick and choose the heroes that we want to celebrate. This man is a national hero. This man is an American hero. This is somebody we should talk about. This is somebody he could have taken his money and gone about his business, moved to Canada, I don't know, moved to France somewhere with his family, but he didn't. He re-entered the war and then ended up going back to the very same town he was from and bought the house, right? That his former owner had. I mean, that's some balls right there. That's a brave man. Shout out to him. But either way, man, thank you guys. I appreciate it. You make sure you contribute to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal if you appreciate what I'm doing. Other than that, man, this is Uncle D, and I'm out.